Guys, here we go again. We're gonna finish out the day with some basic wrist X-ray positions and what they demonstrate a little bit. I'm not gonna go into a lot of detail. Like I said, I'm not gonna go into deep teaching. I'm gonna give you some basic techniques, basic positioning that can help you out in your as you work in X-ray and learn to get better in X-ray. So I'm just gonna give you some basics. You're gonna learn this in school, but I'm gonna give you a little bit of insight that you may or may not get. If it's helpful, that's great. All right, we'll take a look. Okay, we're gonna start with the PA wrist. Now the PA wrist is basically like this. We're taking your hand like this, and just a little tidbit, it's good if you can get a 90-degree angle on your arm. For example, your arm is bent at a 90-degree angle. You get something called neutral rotation. A lot of orthopedic doctors prefer that. So if you can achieve that, that's fine. Normally, if the patient's in a trauma situation, you're going to need that 90-degree angle. And when you do your PA shot, you're going to keep your arm at a 90-degree angle like that, and you're going to just bring the arm towards the body, and you'll get your lateral view. And in general, that lateral view will come out better in this position. You get what you call a true lateral. Okay, so we'll go back to the basics here. All right, flat. If you want to open up the carpal canal, you make a fist. You make a fist. So the same position on you're making the fist, you open up the carpal canal. That's usually the case if the patient doesn't have any trauma in their fingers or even in their wrist, for example. If there's trauma, which 9 times out of 10 it's gonna be trauma, you want to just keep the hand in this position, and hopefully maybe you can get it 90 degrees if possible. That way you get the best orientation. Oh, I lost my light. Best orientation for the wrist view. Okay, so that's the PA view. Now we're gonna go this way, 45 degrees. We're gonna get an oblique view. 45 degrees up from the table, which is, we'll just imagine this is an X-ray detector. Now lateral view, I already showed you a little bit. What you're gonna do is just go straight to the side. Make sure there's no rotation either way, and just straight up perpendicular lateral. Like a good way to achieve this, 99.9% of the time, have the arm close to the body if they're able to do that. And that way you get a little support with the arm and you get the position perfect, all right? Now there's some special views also of the wrist. I don't think I'll be able to go into that myself because it's better to have somebody that can model the position for you. But there's one view, for example, is a navicular view, right? See, there's a nickname for this view. For some reason, it's escaping me. Maybe because I'm old. Anyway, this particular view is ulnar flexion. Okay, ulnar flexion. I'm sorry. Ulnar flexion helps. There's a bone right here in the wrist. I need a pointer. Called the navicular bone. And when you flex this way, so say you're doing the left side, you're going to flex to the left. If you're doing the right wrist, you're going to flex to the right, because that's the ulnar flexion. You have your radius and ulnar, so you're flexing away, all right? And your aim, the angle of your X-ray tube is going to be at least 30 degrees towards the center of that bone, right? Like I said, I'm going to have to get a pointer, make things a little bit easier. Anyway, 30 degrees towards that bone right there, towards that navicular bone, boom. And what you're going to do when you do that, you're going to stretch it out. You're going to extend the bone. It's going to stretch out a little bit, and you'll be able to see more details with that angle. Okay, guys, that's pretty much it for this. So this is basically just, like I said, the wrist series, it really varies. One thing I like to note is that I've seen some techs use a small field of collimation. The collimation is a light field that encompasses where the x-ray beam is going to go. So you can make it big, small, short, tall. In this case, sometimes techs can over-collimate. They'll make the beam too small. They'll just kind of try to focus on the carpal bones. The problem with that is that there's something that the radiologist terminology that you use is called incidental findings. An incidental finding is when you find something that wasn't intended on the order, but it just turns up. Like, hey, like you got, like, for example, you have a fracture in your upper part of your arm, but they only ordered was a wrist, but you saw a little bit of a fracture. That's called an incidental finding. So that's a good thing and a bad thing. The bad thing is sometimes the techs will just try to be so perfect with their collimation. They'll just collimate. They'll make the light field too small. The collimate, like I said, the collimator is just a light field that goes over the body part. And you want to have, for radiation safety and protection, you want to minimize as much as possible, which is why most likely they're doing that. But in trauma cases, specifically trauma cases, you want to open up a little bit more. Orthopedic surgeons, orthopedic doctors, they really like to see a little bit more. That way, for example, if the patient has surgery and they have hardware in their extremity or wherever, or certain parts of the body, if you over-collimate and you see some hardware, instinct should tell you to open up so you can see all the hardware. So a lot of times what happens is you'll order a wrist series and you have a limited field. You won't be able to see all the hardware, for example, or maybe a potential fracture if you just have a small little field. So if you're doing a wrist series in an emergency room or ER or something like that, you want to open up the field a little bit more. You want to stay within safety parameters, of course, naturally, but you want to open up a little bit more than you normally would. So for example, let me just, you would go from here to say here on the forearm to get a little bit more. So I'm going to come back a little bit to give you an example. So see the top of the wrist where my hand is, that's to say the top is right there. You're going to go to about here, for example, with your collimator, so that you can possibly see a fracture. If it's like, say you don't see anything in the carpal bones, which is the bones in this area, you may end up seeing a fracture a little bit higher. So that basically that can apply to any part, any anatomy. But in this case, we're talking about wrist views. You want to open up just a little bit more, right? And something that's also very important when you do your lateral views, like I mentioned before, you want to be able to see if there's any anterior. Let me show you this real quick. Be able to see if there's any anterior, which is here, and posterior dislocation or subluxation. Subluxation is basically another word for dislocation, but sublux is when the bone moves out of position in a certain angle. Let's call it that's what it means. That's what I mean by sublux. Or a dislocation is when it dislocates from, say, a joint, from a joint space, like a dislocated shoulder, dislocated knee, dislocated hip. Those are coming out of a pocket in the joint. Because so when you talk about subluxation, we're talking about, say, the radius and ulna, for example. Say one of them is bent forward, which would be anterior here. Say one of them is bent forward, or say the radius is bent forward, and say the ulna is bent backwards. That would be forward would be anterior subluxation. Backward would be posterior subluxation. So in order to be able to determine that, you need to have a good lateral view where there's hardly any rotation. The best way, like I said, to do that is to have the arm bent and up against the body at a 90-degree angle. So the arm is at a 90-degree angle, bent like that. And so you want to have your hand straight up and down. You don't want it to be rotated forward a little bit or back. So, like it's not going to be perfect every time. So you may have to do a couple of shots to check your rotation. Nobody's going to be perfect every time, not even me. Okay. So you're going to go, you want to have your hand perfectly straight. If there's any rotation, you want to adjust to where it's perfect. I mean, there is a way to get it practically perfect. And orthopedic doctors pretty much need that. Because we're talking about the difference between getting proper function and having limited function. And how can you tell that if you don't know the positions of the bones for them to make the adjustments, and whether it be a cast or surgery? So I went into a little extra detail on that. Just to give you some insight on what we have to do as technologists, what our obligations and responsibilities to be as sharp and precise as possible. All right, so that's it for today. That's it for today, last video for today. And I hope you learned something from that. And I'll try to go into more detail as I'm starting to get the feel of this a little bit better. But anyway, have blessings to you, and God bless y'all, and y'all have a great day. Rest of your day.